Okay. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And we are going to embark today on the kingship of King Saul. So that's a little adventure before we get to King David. So we're going to start, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to do the blessing for studying Torah. If it hasn't gone away. Wait a minute, I had it.
If we wait a second, Sherry can't find the link.
Well, you can send it to her and she can join us in progress.
Okay.
Okay. We're just going to do the blessing for studying the Torah, but I'm going to have to mute you so we don't. Okay. Thank you. All right. It's the same link every week, by the way. Every week, same exact link. Okay. There's Sandy. Okay. There's Gail. Hi, both of you. We're about to do the blessing for the studying of Torah. Here we go. I made it really big today because I finally figured out how to do it. Okay, here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah, or of Tanakh in this case, right? But Torah really means teaching anyway. So I'm going to now share the chapter that we're going to be doing. Hang on a sec. Okay, share screen. Here we are. Nice and big, right? Yeah. Okay. So who would like to start reading? This is, remember, Samuel is the prophet, and he kind of tried to create, I'm going to stop 1 second. He kind of tried to create a dynasty, right, by having his sons follow in his footsteps. But then we discovered that his sons were corrupt and the people wanted a king. And remember that the main reason people seem to want a king is because the Philistines are constantly attacking them. They have far superior technology to fight with. And the Israelites don't seem to be able to defeat them in any kind of conclusive way. And Samuel is very opposed to this idea of a king, but this is the one that God has chosen. So let's take a look at who this guy is, this very first king of Israel. Who would like to start reading?
I can read.
Great, thank you.
There was a Benjamite, a man of standing, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, the son of Zorar, and the son of Bechorath, and the son of Aviah of Benjamin. Kish had a son named Saul, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else.
Okay, let's just stop there for 1 minute. What are we learning about Saul to begin with? What are, I mean, these are a couple of important characteristics, to tell you the truth.
That he's tall and handsome.
He's tall and handsome. So at least from the outside, it looks like he's somebody who would be a king, right? Because like, especially in our day and age of celebrity, the person who's going to become the president or whatever has to have a certain, it doesn't have to be tall and handsome in a, kind of classic sense, but has to have a certain charisma, right? And a certain look. What else? Yeah, Jenny. Jenny disappeared into the forest and you're muted, so I can't hear if you're talking.
There, can you hear me?
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, I'm using the Jewish Study Bible, and it said that handsome was considered a royal quality in ancient Israel.
Okay, great. Thank you. So handsome was a royal quality. I mean, we know, you'll find out that David was very handsome also. I don't know about all the kings, but in any event, I guess that's the retrospective look at him. The other thing is, what tribe is he from?
Benjamin, which is the smallest of the tribes. So he comes from the smallest of the tribes, but he's also a man of great means. His father is. So he's rich. Saul is rich.
He's rich. He's from, yeah. And what happened with the tribe of Benjamin? Anybody remember from Judges?
Didn't they get absorbed with Judah?
They didn't get absorbed, but there was a big fight on the part of all the other tribes against Benjamin. Remember the Levite who cut up the wife into pieces and sent it to all the tribes?
Yeah. Yeah, forgot.
So it's an interesting background. Okay, so the first thing you see of a character is very important. And the first thing you hear them say is also very important. And generally, the Bible is fairly terse about descriptions. And so what you do get takes on even more significance. Okay, we're going to go back to the text. Go ahead, Doug.
Now the donkeys belonging to Saul's father Kish were lost, and Kish said to his son Saul, "Take one of the servants with you and go and look for the donkeys." So he passed through the hill country of Ephraim and through the area around Salisha, but they did not find them. They went on to the district of Shalem, but the donkeys were not there. Then he passed the territory of Benjamin, but they did not find them. When they reached the district of Zuph, Saul said to the servant who was with him, "Come, let's go back, or my father will stop thinking about the donkeys and start worrying about us." But the servant replied, "Look, in this town there is a man of God. He is highly respected, and everything he says comes true. Let's go there now. Perhaps he will tell us what way to take." Saul said to his servant, "If we go, what can we give the man? The food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have?" The servant answered him again. "Look," he said, "I have a quarter of a shekel of silver. I will give it to the man of God so that he will tell us what way to take. Formerly in Israel, if someone went to inquire of God, they would say, 'Come, let us go to the seer,' because the prophet of today used to be called a seer." "Good," Saul said to his servant, "Come, let's go." So they set out for the town where the man of God was.
Okay, let's just stop there for a second. So let me just remind you about the tribe of Benjamin. So first of all, who was Benjamin in the scheme of our patriarchal family? Which kid was it? He was the youngest, and he was Jacob's favorite, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, so that's also, I think,
and
significant.
favorite brother Joseph.
Right. They were both Rachel's sons. So, you get a little tinge of the favoritism, the younger one, whatever, maybe that's somewhere in the background. But remember, at the end of Judges, there was a horrible rape that occurred, right? Remember the concubine, the Levite's concubine was gang raped and killed. And that was by the tribe of Benjamin, or at least the territory of Benjamin and Benjaminites who did this thing. And then the Levite goes home and she's dead already, and he cuts her up and sends pieces around to different tribes to take revenge on the Benjaminites. So that's not, and we just very recently read that, right? It was right before the first book of Samuel, right? It was the end of the book of Judges. So I'm not sure, whether that's such a great mark to come from the tribe of Benjamin at this particular juncture in history, right? So you get these echoes of that stuff. But then what do we see him doing? The first thing we see Saul doing and talking about.
He's doing an errand for his father.
Yeah.
And to me, he seems like a concerned son, because he tells the servant, "Well, we haven't found these donkeys yet, or what they're looking for. So we need to go back, because otherwise my father's going to worry about us."
Okay, so that's good. So he seems to be a good son. That's not a bad thing to be. But the job he has to go looking after the donkeys, not the most elevated thing. And then it doesn't seem like he really has a sense of what he's supposed to do, right? I mean, he has to ask a servant, for his advice. And the servant is the one who has money on him. It reminds me of my former brother-in-law, he'd arrive at lunch and, "Oh, gee, I left my wallet at home." But, that's not a very sort of royal way to go about. He's not a king yet, obviously, but he's about to be anointed. And, he doesn't seem to have much going on. I mean, that's just my first impression. Maybe you feel that it's different. But it's not like you see him in battle, right? I mean, for this period of time being that's the first thing you're going to see about David, right? That David goes in there and is able to kill Goliath.
So he doesn't
And-
seem very sure of himself.
He doesn't seem very sure of himself, definitely not. And he's not doing something heroic, right? When we see him, that's the point I'm trying to make about the donkeys. It's not very heroic, right? We're looking for donkeys, and then at some point when he can't find them, I guess you have to decide, is it worth spending more time, or do we maybe change our method of trying to find them, right? So I'm just suggesting that he doesn't come across as somebody really spectacular. Okay, we're going to continue.
Christine had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Christine.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It was just a comment. He doesn't know
Go
his
ahead.
ass from his elbow.
Good, yeah.
For
Well,
the donkeys.
Right. Exactly. Well, the ass thing is pretty funny in English, but unfortunately, I
It
don't. think
doesn't
it
work in
translates.
Hebrew.
Yeah.
But I think the point the larger point is also that with most characters, we only get maybe one story that's supposed to be emblematic of their character. And this is the only one we're getting to set him up. And it's so bland of
Yeah,
a
exactly.
tale, right? I mean, like, of all the things you could do to introduce a king, to start off with him wandering hills looking for a donkey just seems
Exactly.
so pointless. And
Exactly.
so trying to find something deeper in it, but it doesn't seem to be there.
Well,
Yeah, I agree.
I
Yeah,
think
Kristen.
there might be, because basically he doesn't know what he's doing, but he consults people that were unlikely, like his
Yes,
servant. And
exactly.
he listens to the people.
Yeah.
He's going to listen to a man of wisdom and his servant to figure out what to do.
Okay, well, that's finding the silver lining. Thank you, Christine. That's good. Yeah, actually, there are going to be two stories about Saul, about how he got anointed. This is the first one. The second one is equally strange, but I don't want to give it away, so we'll get there together. All righty. So, and the idea that the servant has to say, look, there's a man of God who's highly respected. So he's the one who's coming up with another idea about how to find the donkeys or about what to do next, as opposed to, I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we've, let's say, look for something and you look and look and look and you can't find it. It's usually staring right at you. But anyway, sometimes you have to walk away from it, to get a new perspective. Sometimes you have to ask someone, do you know where I put this or where you put it? Or, you can't just do the same thing over and over again and expect different results, right? You know what that means. Okay. So, Doug, if you would not mind continuing, and then let's see where we were. Good. Yeah. Okay. Verse 11.
So, as they were going up the hill to the town, they met some young women coming out to draw water, and they asked them, "Is the seer here?" "He is," they answered. "He's ahead of you. Hurry now. He has just come to our town today, for the people have a sacrifice at the high place. As soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. The people will not begin eating until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Afterwards, those who were invited will eat. Go up now. You should find him about this time."
Okay. So this is kind of funny. Okay. So I think this is Alter, who suggests that the reason these maidens, it might have been the Stone, I don't know, the Stone edition, I'm not sure. Anyway, the reason these maidens give such a very long answer. Well, take a guess. Why do you think they give such a long answer?
Because he's pretty.
Very good, Harvey. That's what they suggest, because he's a good looking guy and they want to gaze at him. And then another answer is, he's about to meet Samuel and there's a specific time that they're supposed to meet. And it's a delay that might be necessary so they could meet at exactly the right time. So that's just a cute little note there. Okay, I think we'll move on. Okay, verse 14.
They went up to the town, and as they were entering it, there was Samuel coming toward them on his way up to the high place. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. "About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me." When Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, "This is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people." Saul approached Samuel in the gateway and asked, "Would you please tell me where the seer's house is?" "I am the seer," Samuel replied. "Go up ahead of me to the high place, for today you are to eat with me, and in the morning I will send you on your way and tell you all that is in your heart. As for the donkeys you lost 3 days ago, do not worry about them. They have been found. And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and your whole family line?" Saul answered, "But I am not a Benjamite from the small, but I am not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of
But
Israel.
am I not? Am I not?
Thank you, but am I not a
I know, it
Benjamite
took me a
from the
couple of
smallest,
takes.
from the
Mhm.
smallest tribe of Israel, and is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me?" Then Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall and seated them at the head of those who were invited, about 30 in number. Samuel said to the cook, "Bring the piece of meat I gave you, the one I told you to lay aside." So the cook took up the thigh with what was on it and set it in front of Saul. Samuel said, "Here is what has been kept for you. Eat, because it was set aside for you this occasion from the time I said, I have invited guests." And Saul dined with Samuel that day. After they came down from the high place to the town, Samuel talked with Saul on the roof of his house. They rose about daybreak, and Samuel called to Saul on the roof, "Get ready, and I will send you on your way." When Saul got ready, he and Samuel went outside together. And as they were going down to the edge of town, Samuel said to Saul, "Tell the servant to go on ahead of us." And the servant did so. "But you stay here for a while so that I may give you a message from God."
Thank you. So now notice a couple of things. Saul sees Samuel, has no idea that he's the seer or the prophet. And I think that's, not very astute of him, because I'm assuming that it was a special thing for this guy to come visit Samuel, and that there must have been a crowd around him or something that would make it pretty clear who he was. Again, the Bible being so terse, I think, repeating this dialogue kind of underlines that, tell me. And then he's asking where the seer's house is. Why is that a problem? Yes, Christine.
Town. He doesn't
What?
live in the town.
He doesn't live in the
He's
town. He was
visiting,
just told in a very long explanation by these young women who want to stare at him.
right?
But he's visiting, so he doesn't have a house there.
So he's a
right?
doofus.
He's kind of a bit of a doofus, yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he's very humble, which is not a bad thing for, our history, because supposedly Moses was humble, although we don't see a lot of evidence of that, but supposedly he was very humble. But this guy is so humble. "Oh, me, I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, it's a little tiny tribe." Well, apparently, even though it's a small tribe, it's a very powerful one. And believe it or not, as we said before, this guy's a rich kid. So for him to be that humble about, "Well, me, why me? I'm only from this little tribe and from this little rich father," it's like over the top. Okay. Any other comments about our first king, Saul, and any thoughts about him? Yes, Dan.
So does this seem to be setting up what happens later, in which he really completely falls out of favor with God?
I think
So
so.
decides he really is a lightweight. And,
Yeah. It's a lightweight. Yes, I think that's part of it. I mean, of course, you have to remember who wrote this. It was written by people who, survived all the different wars and everything. They're people from Judah who are the tribe of David. So they're not going to make their, rivals look good. On the other hand, what is interesting about the Bible is, it's different strands of material that was passed down and orally transmitted, then written down, then edited together. Sometimes you get two different visions of a person. So actually, even though the history is written by those who, survived, those from Judah, the portrait of David is not all that flattering in many places, especially at this like a key moment when it's really, really unflattering. We'll see. We'll get there eventually. Yeah. So I just want to say, and every character in here is pretty complicated, right? Abraham, the father of our religion, right? Lies, puts his wife in danger when they go to another place like Egypt because there's a famine, is willing to kill his kid. We're not sure that's such a great thing. So they're all complicated people. Saul, so far we know he's handsome, but aside from that, he doesn't seem to be that bright or that, and definitely not sure of himself, asking a servant for advice. Okay, Jane, go ahead.
So my question is this: if he's such a doofus, why did God pick him?
Interesting
To be
question.
To be the first king? Is God still angry about the changeover from God being the king to the king being a king? Does he want this to fail? And if so, how fair is that to Saul?
Well, that's an excellent question.
We keep riding Saul. I mean, that's all I've heard for the last 20 minutes is
He's
Saul
a good son,
this.
though. We did notice that he was a good son.
Yes, I noticed that. I have to tell you that I'm a Saul supporter. I think he's gotten a really rough deal.
Okay, I agree with you. And by the way, I did have a note here that he was sensitive towards his father, but you got to it before I did. So, but yeah, you're right. No, you're right.
This question is very serious because
no, it is.
God is playing a role here. God is deliberately picking someone who is going to fail. And I think we have to ask why. Because this is the beginning of our history, you know, with the monarchy. So I find it a very perplexing question. And I was just wondering what other people were thinking, or should we hold off?
Well, I think
because Saul gets worse. I mean, he doesn't get better.
Yes, he does. And no, but you know, what I'm thinking in terms of your question, which is really excellent, and I hadn't thought of it that way at all, is the monarchy is ultimately a failure.
Yes.
Right? They get kicked out of the land ultimately at the end of the story. So the monarchy has not been a success. None of these kings really succeed because either the kings are very savvy militarily and politically and economically, and then they happen to be unfaithful to God and get punished for it, or they're very faithful to God and they get killed by the enemy, like Hezekiah, for example. So what does that tell us, right? The faithful ones are unsuccessful. The unfaithful ones are successful, and ultimately none of them succeed because they all get kicked out of the land. I don't know. That's an excellent, excellent question.
Well, and to take your comment a little bit further, the monarchy may have failed, but the idea of a Davidic successor who becomes the Mashiach, that stays.
Yeah, well, we haven't gotten there yet in all these thousands of
years. I know, but David was a king, so the assumption is it's going to be a
definitely. Yes,
yeah.
It is in the far future, in the idyllic future where it, you know, I mean, to me, the sort of basis of all of this is the first two stories of creation. God creates a world that is symmetrical, right? Every day is done in the same way. Everything is in its place. Everything's good. All right, it's great. Next chapter, human beings have to implement God's perfect plan. What happens? They screw up right away. So to me, that's sort of the story of the Bible, of the people, and God has a plan, whatever you understand God to be, and we try to implement it in our own very, very flawed way. And sometimes we succeed for a brief moment, and other times we don't. But why God picked Saul? That's an excellent question. I don't have an answer. I haven't seen any commentary on that from what I read. You know, listen, part of it may very well be that there was a king named Saul or like Saul, and he was part of the history of the people, and you're not going to just not have him in there. And of course, you're going to say God anointed him. And then
the name Saul mean?
Shaul, that means to question.
Oh, to question Shaul.
Like Shaul is to question.
That's often a clue.
Good. Yeah. So I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts about why this guy got anointed? Christine?
I hate to say it, but sometimes the Old Testament God is a bit venal, and I think that it's also he doesn't want any rivals. right?
Okay,
This guy could
interesting.
never be a rival to God, and he doesn't
Interesting.
want the people to confuse their, secular leader with a deity.
Interesting. Okay, so
and
it's out
so
of
they-
jealousy,
Produces,
Sort of.
potentially trying to nip it in the bud,
trying to nip.
like-
Good. That's a great solution. Anybody else have an idea about it?
Sounds like you're saying that God is passive aggressive.
Ah! Well, if you look at let's remember that at least in our reform movement, we don't believe that this was written by God, right? That we wrote it, maybe divinely inspired at times, but I really highly recommend that you read the book Who Wrote the Bible by, I've mentioned it before, Richard Elliott Friedman, because the first time I read it was before I was even thinking about becoming a rabbi. And I was so shocked because, to me, the Bible, I hadn't really read it, but I thought, well, it's, at least divinely inspired by these divinely inspired men, right?
Right.
And then what you read about is that you have these four main sources of it's really about the Torah, not so much about the rest of the Bible. These four main sources based on different priestly groups who are in competition with each other for influence. And so, one source is put here and then another source is put there to challenge the first one. And I'm like, wait a minute, these are supposed to be, divine people, and they're having political fights. And it was so distressing to me at the time. I was very naive, obviously. Then the second time I read it, which was when I was in rabbinical school, I realized, oh, you know what? People are complicated. They can be divinely inspired and petty, right? So they're the ones who wrote this story, okay? And when they're writing about God and they're saying we're made in God's image, all they can do is project their own personalities onto God, right? So if God is jealous or petty or passive aggressive, those are our tendencies that are being reflected in the character of God. Another really excellent book that I read a long time ago was God, a Biography.
Jack Miles.
Jack Miles, right. Jack Miles was a LA Times columnist, I believe, or a reporter.
No,
And
he was
also
a
had-
professor of religion at Claremont.
Yeah.
You're thinking of Jonathan Kirsch.
No.
Really? Oh,
No.
go ahead.
He also
Sorry.
wrote stuff for the Times. And he's also, also had a degree in religion, but I'm pretty sure he had both. Anyway, he wrote this book called God, a Biography. And it's just about the character of God throughout the Bible as a literary character and the development of that character. And, of course, if I were an Orthodox person, that would be blasphemous, right? But I think, it's really worth reading that to see the character, because again, we don't believe that God wrote the Bible, right? We just believe human beings wrote it. Sometimes they really had some great deep insight. Yeah, Christine.
I think that also it's a reminder that, human beings cannot know God.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't really get a grasp on this. And so it is a projection, when it appears, it's in part a projection. And so, we're not really saying that God is like that because we can't know. But so we get these flawed images of, what we would do in that situation and other kinds of real problematic things.
What was the name of the first book you mentioned, Rabbi?
Who Wrote the Bible?
Okay.
By Richard Elliott Friedman.
Richard Elliott. Thank you.
Mark took his class in UC San Diego and
Lucky
really
him.
found it fascinating. And of course, he read the book too.
Okay, I'm going to just read you a little bit about Jack Miles, who wrote not the autobiography of God. That would be scary. The Bible's supposed to be the autobiography, right? He's a winner of the Pulitzer Prize, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the MacArthur Fellowship.
Wow.
Yeah. He's written on religion, politics, and culture in the Atlantic Monthly, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, etc. And he was a Jesuit seminarian for a while. And he also went to Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he has a doctorate in Near Eastern languages from Harvard. not someone to, sneeze at. He's fluent in several languages, including French, Italian, German, Hebrew, and Aramaic. He was an editor at Doubleday, the executive editor at the University of California Press, editor at the LA Times, member of the Times editorial board, the J. Paul Getty Museum, and he's most recently served on the faculty of the UC Irvine Department of English, teaching religion. So anyway, he's worth reading. It's really a great book.
What's his name again?
It's called God, a Biography by Jack Miles. So that's your homework for the next few weeks, is to read those two books.
Okay. Rabbi, can I ask a question about
Yeah.
the author of the book of Samuel? I understood that this was a different author than the 4 redactors. Am I right or wrong?
Yes. So the history section is supposedly written by the Deuteronomic historians. So following in the sort of theology of Deuteronomy, but not the same writer. And, the Richard Elliott Friedman book about who wrote the Bible, it's not the most current scholarship that there were 4 sources. They think there are many more than 4 sources, but it's a good sort of foundation for understanding how this thing got put together. And it's all speculative, right? I mean, when they say there are 4 sources, what they're looking at are things like what is God called in a particular source? Is it Elohim? Is it Yud-He, Vav-He? They look at the language. There are all sorts of things they look at to decide, oh, this is from this source and this is from that source, right? Is it really the fact that there were all these sources that were knitted together and it was not in one fell swoop given to Moses in 40 days on Mount Sinai? Who knows, right?
In Iran's class, he goes through the different redactors depending on what he's talking about, and he'll tell you exactly what redactor wrote that particular section. It's fascinating.
Thanks for reminding me of his class, because I think this would be a great class for everybody here to attend, which is starting on Thursday. Aaron Weisben is going to be talking about the historical basis for, or non-existent basis for different stories in the Tanakh. So go ahead, Dan.
Just one other quick comment, because it's going to come up later. There's kind of a geographical anomaly here, which is that Saul was from Benjamin, but it appears that David was from way south of there.
Oh, Judah,
And David was definitely in an area where people were brushing up frequently against the Philistines, which is way down in Gaza Strip. And also apparently near Edom, which is way south of the Dead Sea. And that is sort of a curiosity. And I'm almost wondering whether the people who wrote these different sections might have been different.
Well, I'm not sure how, like Richard Elliott Friedman, actually I have a copy at the temple. He published a book of the Torah with different fonts for different sources, for the 4 sources that he's talking about. So it's interesting to see, okay, this chapter was written by one, this was written by someone else, this one has several put together. I don't have anything similar for the rest of the Tanakh. And he hasn't published that. And as I said, his book, Who Wrote the Bible, is really about who wrote the Torah. So I don't have, I know it's a sort of school of Deuteronomy that wrote this history. I think it's mainly from the South because they survived, but I don't really know more details than that. Somebody might have studied that, but I don't personally.
It's been around for a while. Do you have any idea when it was published?
What? You mean Friedman's book?
Yeah.
Oh, it's been around for at least 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Okay. I read it way. Oh, Carl, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if people are interested, there's called the Jewish Study Bible, and it has a lot of essays.
Yes.
And I can just really recommend it. It's when I'm referring to it, that's what I'm using. I don't know that I can get it to show up here, but anyway, it's called the Jewish Study Bible, and it includes the whole Tanakh, and it has a lot of essays and commentary. I can just
Yeah, this is the one I actually recommend for my Introduction to Judaism class because it has commentary on the entire Tanakh.
right.
Now,
It also has a lot of maps too.
it has
which is very
maps, yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, it doesn't have the Hebrew though, which is kind of annoying for those of, but actually right now, you know, when I was doing the Torah, I had all these essays I could find, you know, these Divrei Torah that people did on the different parts of Torah. There isn't the same thing for the rest of the book, and certainly not from a Jewish perspective. It's a lot more that's Christian. So I've been using, this is the Stone edition, which is like ultra Orthodox, okay, and it has lots of strange commentary. There are a lot of justification for things that you might say, what are you talking about? And then Dan Strauss gave us this series by Robert Alter. This is the middle one, the prophets. There's 3 books, and it's got a lot of notes in here about, but the notes tend to be a little bit more about what things mean, you know, in terms of like what a word means or an expression or something like that, rather than, let's say, a whole drosh or interpretation. My favorite Torah commentary is the Eitz Chaim, which is the conservative one. But when I teach Intro to Judaism, I recommend the book that Jenny mentioned because, I mean, the Bible that she mentioned, because it's got commentary on everything, not just on the Torah. But, you know, you could endlessly, you know, there's so much out there. But unfortunately, as I said, a lot of the commentary on the rest of the Tanakh tends to be Christian, because the Jewish writers, Jewish commentators tend to focus more on the Torah. Okay, so let's continue. I'm going to go to the next chapter. Okay, did it go? No, it didn't. Yes, there it is. Okay. All right, who would like to read? Jane, you want to read? Oh,
Yeah,
Jenny, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Then Samuel took a flask of olive oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, "Has not the Lord anointed you ruler over his inheritance? When you leave me today, you will meet 2 men near Rachel's tomb at Zelzah on the border of Benjamin. They will say to you, 'The donkeys you set out to look for have been found, and now your father has stopped thinking about them and is worried about you. He is asking, what shall I do about my son?' Then you will go on from there until you reach the great tree of Tabor. 3 men are going up to worship God at Bethel will meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, another 3 loaves of bread, another a skin of wine. They will greet you and offer you 2 loaves of bread, which you will accept from them. After that, you will go to Gibeah of God.
Gibeah.
Gibeah of God, where there is a Philistine outpost. As you approach the town, you will meet a procession of prophets coming down from the high place with lyres, timbrels, pipes, and harps being played before them, and they will be prophesying. The Spirit of the Lord will come powerfully upon you, and you will prophesy with them, and you will be changed into a different person. Once these signs are fulfilled, do whatever your hands find to do, for God is with you. Go down ahead of me to Gilgal. I will surely come down to you to sacrifice burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, but you must wait 7 days until I come to you and tell you what you are to do."
Great, thank you. So first of all, pouring a flask of oil over his head is the way a king or a prophet was anointed in those days. And the word Mashiach, which is Messiah, means having oil poured on your head, basically. Mashiach is poured. So a Messiah is not a divinely appointed person. I mean, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. Of course, they're divinely appointed. I mean, it's not a divine person. It's not like the Messiah is some God that's going to come out of, you know, a chariot or something. It is someone who has had oil poured on his head as a king. So somebody said earlier, the Messiah is a king, right? It doesn't mean what it came to mean with Jesus, that it's, some kind of divine being and, whatever. This guy's Mashiach too. He had the oil poured on his head, okay? So interesting, I'm going to pull up the text again so we can just look at some of the stuff on here. So the flask that Samuel is using to pour on his head is apparently made of earthenware. And according to either, I should write down which one of these guys I'm quoting, whether it's Alter or the Stone Edition. The flask of earthenware is so fragile that it gives you a kind of metaphoric idea about the fragility of his kingdom. Then also, Samuel is sort of reducing Saul to a puppet here. You're going to do this, then you're going to do that, then you're going to do this, then you're going to do that. I mean, once he's anointed him, he's basically the king. So, why is he being pushed around by this guy, right? Except he doesn't have much of a personality of his own, although Jane may disagree, I don't know. By the way, Gibeah, do you remember Gibeah? What happened in Gibeah? Here, I'll make it yellow, how's that? Oh, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, anybody remember what happened in Gibeah? That's where the rape happened, the Levite's concubine. Okay, so it's all happening in this area that these icky things happened in, which is not really wonderful. It's the same exact spot where that gang rape happened. Clearly, the Philistines are still strong, right? We still have to worry about them. Any other thoughts about what we see here about Saul? Okay, so we'll keep reading. Okay, do you want to continue, Jenny?
So
Oh, one more thing. I'm sorry. I meant to also say the whole thing about the prophesying, right? He needs this kind of ecstatic experience to be transformed from a farmer's kid to a king, right? Because he doesn't have the right internal, feelings, or is not able to operate as though he were a king, right? So he needs this incredibly, yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I actually have just a differentiation I'm trying to understand. So Samuel is described as a seer, and he clearly can see future events. But then we have these other people he's going to meet who are prophesying. What would the people who were prophesying be doing that's different? What are the prophets versus a seer? I guess okay. I'm not sure I understand.
I think it said in an earlier verse that seer was the way they referred to prophets at that time.
So it's the same.
Yeah, it's the same thing. And prophets are not necessarily people who can predict the future, except to the extent that they say, watch out, God's going to punish you if you don't behave, right? But we've kind of turned a prophet into someone who can see into the future, and that's not so much what a prophet was in those days. It was more somebody who could speak truth to power and remind people of their moral obligations. Yeah, Jane.
Just in Saul's defense, I'd like to point out that this is the first anointing of a king, so nobody really knows what's supposed to happen.
Good, that's a good point.
I do not see him as a puppet of Samuel. In fact, I see Samuel working out exactly how am I supposed to do this anointing anyway, because I've never anointed a king before.
Okay.
So I see it as a very experiential, very experimental. And in terms of power, Samuel has much more power than Saul at this point, precisely because he is a prophet and Saul is a farmer's son.
Okay, let me read you a couple of notes from Robert Alter, because I'm sorry. So I know you like Robert Alter too, right?
Yeah,
okay.
In fact, I have a book here, right?
Okay, so first of all, anointment is the biblical ritual of conferring kingship, like coronation in the later European tradition. Samuel carries out this act secretly. on the outskirts of the town, conferring on Saul in keeping with the terms God has used as the title Nagid, prince, rather than king.
Mhm.
So he's already demoted by that title. But anyway, in terms of,
God.
okay, in terms of Samuel,
Uh-huh.
this elaborate set of instructions and predictions is, as Robert Polson has argued, a strategy for asserting continued control over the man Samuel has just anointed. Every predictive step manifests Samuel's superior knowledge as prophet, and all the instructions reduce the new king to Samuel's puppet.
Hmm.
That's where I got it from. It's just his perspective. It could be wrong,
Mhm.
you know,
And
and maybe,
I'm just saying,
no, it's fine.
we were talking about first impressions and the first words out of your mouth, and I think also the first anointment. I mean, this is going to be very different, for example, than David's anointment.
No, absolutely. And it was done in secret, which is almost
Yeah.
like, is it too like icky to share with everybody else? But, you know,
Right.
listen, defend him. That's great. I mean, we need
Oh,
different.
I will. I really think he got a raw deal.
Yeah, well, I always thought that Esau got a raw deal, and I always defend
Uh-huh.
Esau. But yeah, I've
Doesn't-
never been. a
Doesn't
big
Samuel
defender.
also say that you're going to be a changed man after this too? So
Yeah, well, that's what.
can't we take all of what we're defining as his character to this point and put that aside and say, let's judge him by how he
Okay.
is,
All right, let's see how he
After.
behaves next.
right?
Okay, Jason, you'll be the first one I'll ask to see if you've changed your opinion of him. Okay. No, that's
So
you're absolutely right.
maybe Jane's impression is, more by the later. I don't know.
Later. Okay. No, that's a great point.
I agree. I think that, well, I think I agree with Jane. It seems to me that Samuel doesn't want to give up power, or maybe it's the whole, that he, like I was saying last week, that it seems like the priestly power, or the God power, is fighting with the what's the word? They don't want to give up power.
Secular and
Yeah.
Well, that's very possible. Listen, as we saw, Samuel wanted to have a dynasty, and that didn't work out. So why should he be so excited about appointing somebody else to be the next leader, right? Who's going to have more power than he is.
But it is
Yeah.
kind of amazing that, Samuel has visions of what's going to happen to Saul in the future. And he's spelling it out so precisely that you're going to meet 3 people here and get 3 loaves of bread. 3 seems to be a magical number in this.
Yeah.
And, and it just like, it's just so many steps that he's seeing in advance that it's like, this is really pretty heavy duty stuff,
Yeah.
It's very shamanistic in a lot of ways.
Right. It does. Hang on just one second. It does definitely show that, he's got knowledge superior to that of Saul.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. This is going to happen. That's going to happen, whatever. Saul has no clue. Go ahead, Christine.
Just to wax a little anthropological about this, in a lot of sort of chiefships that are not yet states, in that seesaw time period that seems to be what state formation is about, there is a group of people typically who have the responsibility to remind the high chief or whoever it is that they are the one, they don't have all the knowledge, that they are not so great, and that they are fallible, and so on and so forth. And it gets weakened to the point where the Romans had the "remember thou art mortal," that kind of thing. It's very weak. But in Tonga, I saw with my very eyes the king of Tonga get reamed by this old man who clearly was not, a wealthy guy or anything else. He just came. In fact, he sold items to the tourists. But he came to the middle of this major ceremony and started telling him all about what's wrong with his corruption and what was going to happen if he continued on that path. And the king could say nothing to this guy because it was customary to have somebody remind whatever the head honcho was, that they are not all that.
That's great, Christine.
So I'm wondering whether or not this is Samuel saying, okay, we're not going to let this guy forget that there are these prophets and they are prophesying, and you have to pay attention to them. You cannot be transformed without them.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that anthropological insight. And we're going to see the prophets will continue to play that role throughout here. I think we could use a few of them in our society, especially speaking truth to power. Okay, so let's read on. So, wait, where do we stop? Here we are. All right, so it says Saul made king. So he's, not quite king yet. Let's see what happens now. Jenny, I'm sorry, I interrupted you before, so please continue.
Okay. As Saul turned to leave Samuel, God changed Saul's heart, and all these signs were fulfilled that day. When he and his servant arrived at Gibeah, a procession of prophets met him. The Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he joined in their prophesying. When all those who had formerly known him saw him prophesying with the prophets, they asked each other, "What is this that has happened to the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?" A man who lived there answered, "And who is your father?" So it became a saying, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" After Saul stopped prophesying, he went to the high place. Now Saul's uncle asked him and the servant, "Where have you been?" "Looking for the donkeys," he said. "But when we saw they were not to be found, we went to Samuel." Saul's uncle said, "Tell me what Samuel said to you." Saul replied, "He assured us that the donkeys had been found, but he did not tell his uncle what Samuel had said about the kingship."
Isn't that interesting that what was going on in all this time? Oh, we were looking for the donkeys, and then Samuel told us where they were. It's like, that's what just happened to you? I'm sorry, Jane, you probably have some great explanation for why that's not, bizarre. Maybe he was worried that his uncle would say, "Wait a minute, you can't be king. I want to be king." Who knows, right? All right, please keep going.
Samuel summoned the people of Israel to the Lord at Mizpah and said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought Israel up out of Egypt, and I delivered you from the power of Egypt and all the kingdoms that oppressed you. But you've now rejected your God who saves you out of all your disasters and calamities. And you have said, 'No, appoint a king over us.' So now present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and clans." When Samuel had all Israel come forward by tribes, the tribe of Benjamin was taken by lot. Then he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin, clan by clan, and Matri's clan was taken. Finally, Saul, son of Kish, was taken. But when they looked for him, he was not to be found. So they inquired further of the Lord, "Has the man come here yet?" And the Lord said, "Yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies." They ran and brought him out, and as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the people." Then the people shouted, "Long live the king."
Thank you. All right. Now tell me what this is the sort of second anointing, in a sense, the second choosing of Saul. So first of all, how are they choosing him?
Why, he's tall. You could know that he's tall above all the other men.
Right, but what is what ritual are they using to decide who's going to be the king?
Casting lots.
Casting lots, which apparently was usually a way to find a criminal. Remember, way back when we were reading the book of, I think it was Joshua, there was a guy who did something he wasn't supposed to do, and they had to do a lottery also to figure out who it was. So it's not really like a great way, Samuel could have come along and said, "Hey, guess what? God's picked the king, here he is." But they do this lottery, which, really, again, and remember, that's how Haman picks the day to kill the Jews in the book of Esther. Let's do it by lot. It's not really, again, a very honorable way of being chosen. And what is Saul doing while this is happening?
He's hiding.
He's hiding in the baggage area. Now, Jane, tell me how wonderful that makes him for being a king.
My reading of Saul especially in this early part, is that he's very reluctant to do this. This is not something that he desires. It's foisted on him. I mean, in a sense, you know, Samuel pours this oil over his head and says, okay, that's it, you're anointed. Doesn't mean that he's, you know, going to go for it.
Almost
And
like Moses.
Yeah.
Not wanting to-
I mean, he's you could use the word humble. I don't like to use that word with Saul. It doesn't quite fit. But I don't see him as someone who is just desperately grasping to be king. I mean,
That's
when
true.
we study David, the contrast is so stark.
It is.
Between David and Saul as to, I mean, there's no question. David wants the kingship and he's going to do anything to get it.
Right. Okay, great. Well, I want to ask Jason, now he's had his prophesying moment. Do we see a different Saul?
I don't feel like I've seen enough of him to make that. I mean, I don't have any strong impression.
He's
No.
hiding in the baggage. Okay, whatever. All right, I saw there was a hand up. Who was it?
Well, maybe that's his humility. Maybe he just was staying back and waiting to be summoned, as opposed to
hiding in the
standing up
baggage.
there, as opposed to standing up and proclaiming himself something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or he might just be really freaked out, and it's like, oh my God, what's happening to me? But also there's an interesting passage just before that where, you know, the prophets are saying, okay, look, God brought you out of Egypt, brought you, you know, defeated your enemies. And you still betrayed him. You like really messed up again. And now you want to pick a king? Great. You know, here, you pick a king, you know, be careful what you ask for. And so I think I mean, I don't want to see irony in this thing because it's too postmodern, but it seems very ironic. Yeah. Fine, I'll give you a king. Here's your king. He's hiding in the baggage.
Right. It could be ironic. I don't know. These were pretty good writers. Harvey, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I was thinking, you know, his personality is kind of not just humble, but kind of shy, maybe an introvert, and maybe he doesn't want to be in the limelight. Maybe he, you know, even though he's tall and good looking, he doesn't like that. And he's being thrust into this position of being an authority, and maybe his personality is not really that up to that task. Later he becomes a depressive, you know, so there's that kind of thing, which it goes in, you know, so it shows that there's something going on mentally with him that's a little different, where a typical leader would be more of an extrovert, more, you know, dominating. You know, and he's just the opposite of that, which actually is endearing in a lot of ways, you know, at first.
Great. Thank you, Gail. Gail and then Christine.
Yeah, it's just interesting that with Moses, we're told he's such a great leader. I mean, it's more on the commentary that he's a great leader because he was shy and that he didn't want to be the leader and he had a stutter and he fought against us. On the other hand, with Saul, with the same characteristics, we're being told this is a terrible leader. Look, he doesn't want to be a leader.
Oh, good. No consistency. That's definitely a mark of Judaism.
Now you see the story.
Yeah. Okay, Christine.
Well, I also see an element of him not wanting to be humiliated, because the father's comments earlier is, well, I sent him to look for the donkeys, and now I have to look for him. You know, I mean, it's like really very humiliating what this father is saying to him or about him. So maybe he's grown up with like all this, like, you know, you may be good looking, but there's nothing going on inside, right? And you know, for people who value thinking, you know, or cleverness or prophesying, here's like this like empty-headed guy who gets lost looking for the donkeys.
Right. Okay, well, you know, humility is not a bad thing, and we're going to see whether power gets to him or not, or what it does to him. But yeah, humility is not a bad thing, and grasping for power is not such a great thing, and that's not a beautiful trait in David either, as we'll see. and he ends up treating his wife pretty badly as a result of that. Okay, so let's go on with that chapter. So now we're down. Everyone says, "Long live the king." Okay, Jenny, you want to just do the last couple of verses?
Samuel explained to the people the rights and duties of kingship. He wrote them down on a scroll and deposited it before the Lord. Then Samuel dismissed the people to go to their own homes. Saul also went to his home in Gibeah, accompanied by valiant men whose hearts God had touched. Some scoundrels said, "How can this fellow save us?" They despised him and brought him no gifts, but Saul kept silent.
So apparently that's not such a good thing, that Saul did not somehow stand up for himself. Read you the altar. Okay. The inception. Okay, so there's this indication of the inception of court intrigues and calculations at the very beginning of Saul's reign. He's aware of political dissidence, but chooses for the moment not to react. So it's not really a good thing that he's not sort of dealing with this right away, right? When they're dissidents like that. And he knows about it. They don't bring him a tribute, which is not a good thing. And he's not doing anything to, nip this in the bud. And so somewhere I read that this was a failure on his part to assert himself. And maybe it's a wise political decision not to do anything, but he has just been anointed. He's just about to be the first king of Israel. And right away we hear people going, this is not going to work. And he's not somebody that we respect. And so you already have trouble in paradise, right? Any other comments about Saul at this point? Christine?
The clans still have a tremendous amount of power.
Mhm.
And he's from a little tribe, the smallest of the clans within that little tribe. He may be really concerned about overplaying a hand here, and that the clans might just say, well, kaflooey, we're not going along with any of this.
That's a good point.
Kaflooey being an old concept. Sorry.
That's a very good point. I mean, obviously, you don't want to overplay your hand and start asserting yourself before. I mean, he doesn't even have the army under his control yet, right? Okay, so we're going to go on to the next chapter, and Jane, you can read it, which is chapter 11. Let me go on to chapter. Why is this here? Okay. All righty. So Saul is going to do something important. He's going to rescue a city. Okay, go right ahead.
Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Yabesh Gilead. And all of the men of Yabesh said to him, "Make a treaty with us, and we will be subject to you." But Nahash the Ammonite replied, "I will make a treaty with you only on the condition that I gouge out the right eye of every one of you, and so bring disgrace on all Israel."
I'm going to stop you just for 1 second, because remember, we had the Amorites. I think it was the last time we met, we were asking about the Amorites. So it's another people that live there, a group of Canaanites, and they're clearly also a threat in addition to the Philistines. Mm-hmm. And the business about gouging out the eye, apparently your left eye in a battle would be covered by the shield. So if you gouge out the person's right eye, they're obviously not going to be able to fight. So there's a strategic reason for wanting to gouge out the right eye, aside from it being a hideous way of asking people to be subject to you. And, this is sort of a way to shame Saul, because he's a Benjaminite, and now this area is vulnerable. Okay. So let's see what he does about it. Let's see. Here we are, verse 3.
Okay. The elders of Yabesh said to him, "Give us 7 days so we can send messengers throughout Israel. If no one comes to rescue us, we will surrender to you." When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul and reported these terms to the people, they all wept aloud. Just then Saul was returning from the fields behind his oxen, and he asked, "What is wrong with everyone? Why are they weeping?" Then they repeated to him what the men of Yabesh had said.
All right. Anything that you notice here about Saul?
He's out in the fields. He's farming again.
Still farming with his oxen, right? I mean, he's now the
You
king.
know, Samuel did not issue a how to do it guide.
But remember it said at the end of the last chapter that he explained what the duties of the king and what it's supposed to be the duties of the king, the main duty, according to Deuteronomy. Anybody remember?
Mm.
To write Torah.
To write a Torah
That's
scroll,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And to keep it by his side at all times to know what the laws are, right? And here he is back in the field, farmer's boy. Okay, just thought I'd point that out. All righty, so now we'll go back to see what he's up to. Okay.
Let's see, where are
He's,
we?
he's asking why are people upset?
Oh,
And
right,
now we're
right.
at 6.
Right. When Saul heard their words, the Spirit of God came powerfully upon him, and he burned with anger. He took a pair of oxen, cut them into pieces, and sent the pieces by messengers throughout Israel, proclaiming, "This is what will be done to the oxen of anyone who does not follow Saul and Samuel." Then the terror of the Lord fell on people, and they came out together as one. When Saul mustered them at Bezek, the men of Israel numbered 300,000, and those of Judah 30,000. They told the messengers who had come, "Say to the men of Yabesh Gilead, by the time the sun is hot tomorrow, you will be rescued." When the messengers went and reported this to the men of Yabesh, they were elated. They said to the Ammonites, "Tomorrow we will surrender to you, and you can do to us whatever you like." The next day, Saul separated his men into 3 divisions. During the last watch of the night, they broke into the camp of the Ammonites and slaughtered them until the heat of the day. Those who survived were scattered so that no 2 of them were left together.
Great.
Now, there's
So-
a person who just took a lot of action, Rabbi.
Oh boy, all of a sudden, now the Spirit of God takes over him. You may remember that Gideon had the same experience,
Mhm.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And that allowed him to move forward. And then, of course, the hacking of the oxen reminds you of what?
The Levi hacking the lady. To
The lady who
pieces.
happened to be his wife or his
Yeah.
concubine, right?
Yeah.
So similar thing for, so I'm not saying it's a bad thing that he did this, but just the fact that it was done to her previously, maybe has some connotations of something being kind of unseemly. I don't know. Maybe this is the way they used to announce wars in those days, but I don't think you see a lot of that in the rest of the Torah or the Tanakh. So he has suddenly his anger flared, and now he's, taking charge. Like no more of this nonsense, right? If you don't,
And I think that that's a very important point, that the anger flares, because we're going to see that take over.
Yes. And
That's
anger is not always,
It's not always bad.
it's not always bad as long as you can channel it properly. But we'll see. Here he's channeling it properly. He's, been able to defeat this enemy. Also by the trickery of the people of Jabesh, because they're saying to the Amorites, we're going to surrender tomorrow. So the Amorites are completely off guard when they're attacked and killed. But, all's fair in love and war, supposedly, right? Okay. Any other comments before we move forward?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just wanted to comment on this comparison with what we read in Judges about, dividing pieces up. And once again, I think that we're seeing very clearly this transition of trying to figure out what the kingship will actually involve. Because you know how it was done in Judges, and he's actually just commemorating that or imitating that. You really don't have a clear conception of what a king is. And this is the first time that we've read that the tribes are united.
Yes. Yes, this was the whole point of having a king, is to unite the tribes.
Exactly. So, we're taking the first step towards that mission of a united Israel. This is the first time I think we've seen it.
Yeah, it's good to point that out, right?
Yeah.
And that was the reason they wanted to have a kingdom, because they couldn't fight the Philistines the way they were doing it before, which was a few tribes would get together and fight, but it was never a united. It was a sort of loosely united confederacy, and now it's going to be a country or a kingdom.
Right. And the tribe
Amorites?
the tribe that's being attacked by the Ammonites, they couldn't depend on the other tribes to come to
Right.
their aid either.
Right.
So this is
Right.
the first time it's happening.
Yeah. Christine, and then
And
Jenny.
I think that's important.
Is it overstating it to see that cutting up of the oxen as like, okay, are you going to turn yourselves into a sacrifice? With your stubbornness and your separation and everything else, you're going to go up in smoke.
Okay. Well, he says this is what's going to be done to anybody who doesn't follow us. So
Yeah.
hint, hint. Yeah. Okay, Jenny.
So there's a comment in the Jewish Study Bible about Saul coming in from the field, that he had not been publicly inaugurated. And so I was thinking that he didn't sort of go into action until he had to, because he actually didn't have the public authority.
How about the fact that they had just said, "Long live the king," right before that? There was a bunch of people saying that and giving tribute to him, except for those scoundrels. So I'm a little confused by that.
Yeah, good point.
Unless it's about not so much the official title as, when he had to respond, right?
Right.
That part of it, yeah. So, before that, it was like, okay, I'm king, so what? I'm going back to my oxen. But now there's an actual reason for me to be king. Is that what it's trying to say? Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, but he theoretically could have taken control earlier, whatever, but there was no particular reason to do it, right? And now there is. So, okay. Okay, so Jane, you're reading?
The people then said to Samuel, "Who was it that asked, 'Shall Saul reign over us? Turn these men over to us so that we may put them to death." But Saul said, "No, one will be put to death today, for this day the Lord has rescued Israel." I think we need to really remember this line.
Okay.
We don't see it very often.
Yeah, so Saul is being kind. It's not always such a good thing. We'll see that that's going to mean the end of his dynasty, because he also spares somebody else. Once you're told to do something, you better do it, especially if it's God that tells you to do it. But I wanted to read a note on verse 14. So it says in this note, this is the Stone edition, which is the more orthodox. Saul's original coronation had been marred by opposition and lack of respect for his ability to lead. Those were the scoundrels, right? Now that he had united the nation and led it to victory, Samuel seized the opportunity to reestablish the monarchy before the entire nation. So I guess that goes along what Jenny was saying, that it hadn't been quite clearly established yet. Samuel chose Gilgal as the site of this momentous assembly because it was a holy place. So again, Jenny, I think even though you've disappeared into the forest again, and I can't actually see you, but I assume you're there. I guess that it was only a small group of people who actually recognized that this actually had happened, and now we're going to have a real public ceremony. Okay, so that makes sense. So he chooses this place, and it's a site where Joshua established the tabernacle and the ark after the people crossed the Jordan. If you remember back that far, that's what happened when they first got into the land. Another facet of Gilgal's uniqueness was that it faced the place where the waters of the Jordan parted before the ark, allowing the nation to cross into the land. Because remember, there was another parting of the water when they came into the land, to the Jordan parted. Allowing the nation to cross into the land. And it was at Gilgal where the 12 stones from the riverbed were erected to memorialize the miraculous crossing. Furthermore, Joshua had circumcised the men at Gilgal, which in itself was a miraculous event because God had protected the incapacitated nation from attack by the Canaanites until the fighting men were able to recover. So theoretically, they were all circumcised and the Canaanites did not attack them until they were recovered, which, is a religious way of reading this. Thus, Gilgal remained a reminder of God's omnipotence and love of Israel when they were loyal to his will. So Gilgal is an important place for this all to happen. Okay, let's go on to the next chapter.
We didn't finish the last part of the,
We didn't finish it?
I don't think so.
I thought we did, but let me go back.
Isn't it?
Yeah, he says, let's go to Gilgal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Then Samuel said to the people, come, let us go to Gilgal, and there renew the kingship. So all the people went to Gilgal and made Saul king in the presence of the Lord. There they sacrificed fellowship offerings before the Lord, and Saul and all the Israelites held a great celebration.
Okay.
Yes.
So, all right. So who would like to read Samuel's farewell speech? Hello. Anybody? Christine, you want to read it? Go ahead.
Let me unmute. Okay.
Yeah.
Samuel said to all Israel, I have listened to everything you said to me and have set a king over you. Now you have a king as your leader. As for me, I am old and gray, and my sons are here with me. I have been your leader from my youth until this day. Here I stand. Testify against me in the presence of the Lord and his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? From whose hand have I accepted a bribe to make me shut my eyes? If I have done any of these things, I will make it right. You have not cheated or oppressed us, they replied. You have not taken anything from anyone's hand. Samuel said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and also his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand. He is witness, they said.
Okay, we're going to stop here for a second because his affirming that he hasn't taken anything is in contrast to the king, who he is predicting is going to take from the people.
Yeah.
And Moses actually says the same thing. There's a time when his leadership is being challenged, and he says, I haven't taken anything from you. I've been an honest, leader. So stop bitching. No, anyway. So, okay. Anybody have I saw a comment in the chat. Let's see. Well, we had Jason quoting Paul Simon, the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls. Okay, a different kind of prophecy. And so
you were talking about modern prophets and how we need them.
Oh, you were saying, oh yeah.
I was saying, that's the lyric that comes to mind for me.
I see. But I also think of Elie Wiesel as a modern prophet and a few other people, who've been able to speak truth to justice. Martin Luther King and
Maya
Angelou. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Jane.
I just want to remind you, everybody, that while Samuel says, I am pure, I am honest, I didn't take anything from you, he's standing there with his son.
Yes.
Who have done exactly the opposite.
Right.
And you have to ask yourself, or I do, what kind of father is Samuel that his sons are so corrupt? What's up with that family?
That's an interesting question, although I'm not sure we can completely be blamed for our children not doing what we think they should be doing. But
the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree.
Right. But if you're a prophet, you're probably pretty busy and you probably don't have a whole lot of time to spend as a father. In fact, just to deviate for 1 second, I'm reading this book about behind the scenes at 60 Minutes. It's by a producer named Ira Levin. He worked at 60 Minutes for like 25 years. Barbara Droutman had recommended it to me as part of a book festival. And I used to think Mike Wallace was like, on a pedestal when I was in journalism school, and I had met him a few times and just, I would have done anything to work for him. Of course, he was apparently horrible to work for. In fact, I knew somebody who was a producer who had worked for him and said he was very narcissistic and insecure and all of that. But boy, this book, that made him look like an angel before, because he is abusive. He's not passive aggressive at all. He's aggressive. And why did I start talking about him, except for the fact that, we idealize certain people. Oh, I know what it was. It was because he apparently did not have much of a relationship with his son, Chris Wallace, because he was an absentee father. He was running around, his career was more important than anything else. And I think those people worked at 60 Minutes, worked, 80 hours a week or more. I mean, that they were completely devoted to doing this investigative work, which takes a lot of time and energy and dedication. So how can you be a good father, right? In fact, apparently Chris Wallace considers his stepfather to be his father, not Mike Wallace so much. And like Chris Wallace gets married a second time, and Mike Wallace does a toast that is so nasty. I mean, he is just really horrible. So, he actually ended up with I think his son is probably a nicer guy than he is, right? So sometimes the apple falls far from the tree. But somebody like Samuel, wouldn't have a lot of time to devote to bringing up his kids. I don't know. He travels. He's a traveling guy, right? We found out that he was traveling, and that's how Saul first met him. So this is the issue, which also is an issue with Moses. Remember, Moses is, judging all the people and exhausting himself and burning himself out. And his wife has to come with the two kids and say, hey, yeah, remember us, right? He left them behind because he's busy. And before we get the Torah, the family shows up, which leads me to think, in my own interpretation, that, before you get the Torah and before you do all the things that you do as a faithful, a Jew or whatever, you better remember that you have a family, don't leave them behind. And so Saul might have been that kind of, Samuel might have been that kind of father. Yeah, go ahead, Gail.
Weren't Aaron's sons corrupt too?
Whose sons?
Aaron's.
Yes, they were corrupt too. So just again, you're the high priest.
So maybe we're establishing that it's not just a dynasty, that it's people that are maybe morally able to be the king or be the leader is the wise thing to do. Yeah. I think you're right. Sandy.
Well, I was just going to ask, how can a decent person walk off and leave their kids? And
Exactly.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. You have to be more of a well-rounded person to be a good person, right? And people do great things, and they, we could read about all kinds of figures that have been very influential in the world, and yet did they have time for their family? And often they haven't. And Mike Wallace, I think, was married 5 times, but it may not have been because of his devotion to his work. It may have been the nasty personality. Okay, Christine.
Mandela got divorced after he got out of prison.
Yeah, well, there was a whole thing about whether Winnie was involved with a group of, scoundrels.
Yeah.
So who knows? Yeah, go ahead.
Whatever is the case with Winnie Mandela, she's the one who kept him alive.
Yeah.
Because keeping his name in the news for 21 years, they would have killed him long ago. But never mind. Yeah, she had her issues, but on the other hand, he'd be dead. But to me, it's also a warning over and over and over again, and people still haven't learned this, that lineage inheritance is a really bad idea for power. Yeah. It's like really problematic. You don't have inherited positions of power. And this is, how many times do they have to say it? Obviously, today it's also, important.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see if we can just finish this chapter. Yeah, we're on verse 6. Who's reading? Christine?
Then Samuel said to the people, "It is the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your ancestors out of Egypt. Now then, stand here, because I am going to confront you with evidence before the Lord as to the righteous acts performed by the Lord for you and your ancestors. After Jacob entered Egypt, they cried to the Lord for help, and the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your ancestors out of Egypt and settled them in this place. But they forgot the Lord their God, so he sold them into the hands of Sisera, the commander of the army of Hazor, and into the hands of the Philistines and the king of Moab, who fought against them. They cried out to the Lord and said, we have sinned, we have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. But now deliver us from the hands of our enemies, and we will serve you. Then the Lord sent Jerubbaal, Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel, and he delivered you from the hands of your enemies all around you, so that you lived in safety. But when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, was moving against you, you said to me, no, we want a king to rule over us, even though the Lord your God was your king. Now here is the king you have chosen, the one you have asked for. See, the Lord has set a king over you. If you fear the Lord and serve and obey him and do not rebel against his commands, and if both you and the king who reigns over you follow the Lord your God, good. But if you do not obey the Lord, and if you rebel against his commands, his hand will be against you as it was against your ancestors.
So
Now
hang on
then-
just one second. So this is, a review of
Yeah.
the history, which we just went through Joshua and Judges. You were bad, you were punished by having some enemy attack you, then you finally saw the light, so then you were delivered, and, back and forth, back and forth. This is the Deuteronomic theology here.
Yeah.
And remember, Baal was, the divinity of the of the Canaanites, the head divinity, and then these are the female versions here. And then remember Sisera. Remember who defeated Sisera? Do you remember that from the book of Judges? By slamming a tent peg into his skull.
Ooh.
Yael, remember Yael?
Yeah.
Yael is the one who actually delivered us from Sisera, and then the prophetess Deborah sang about it. Okay, so let me just see.
Okay,
All
we're
right.
almost done here. Now then, stand still and see this great thing the Lord is about to do before your eyes. Is not wheat harvest now? Is it not wheat harvest now? I will call on the Lord to send thunder and rain, and you will realize what an evil thing you did in the eyes of the Lord when you asked for a king.
So you don't want rain once the harvest is ready, right? That's why
Yeah.
we pray for rain from the end of Sukkot until Passover. And then after that, we pray for dew, because otherwise it ruins the crops.
Right. Then Samuel called on the Lord, and that same day the Lord sent thunder and rain. So all the people stood in awe of the Lord and of Samuel. The people all said to Samuel, pray to the Lord your God for your servants, so that we will not die, for we have added to all our other sins the evil of asking for a king. Do not be afraid, Samuel replied. You have done all this evil, yet do not turn away from the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Do not turn away after useless idols. They can do you no good, nor can they rescue you, because they are useless. For the sake of his great name, the Lord will not reject his people, because the Lord was pleased to make you his own. As for me, far be it for me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. And I will teach you the way that is good and right. But be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. Yet if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will perish.
Thank you. So let me just mention a couple of things. So one is the Deuteronomic theology here. You do bad, you get punished. You do good, you get saved. Sorry. And also, this is sort of the moment that Saul is being introduced as the king, and Samuel totally upstages him, right? He doesn't say much about him, except you people sinned by asking for a king, and you're going to get punished for that. Not, here's your king. Isn't he a great guy? Let me tell you a little bit about him. He just delivered a whole community from, the Amorites. No, you asked for a king, you're bad. And you're being punished with thunder and rain in the middle of your harvest. And then it's all about the history of how they sinned and been punished, and it's all about Samuel. It's not about Saul at all. So, but he's now old and he's going to have to give up his position. One would hope anyway. Okay, well, it's past 11:30, so I apologize for keeping you a couple minutes later, but thank you for a great discussion. I love the controversy over whether Saul is a good guy or not. That's great. And, it's always great to have all your different perspectives. So have a good Shabbat, a good weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Put a little
shalom.
something in the
Thank you,
chat.
Rabbi.
If anyone's interested, I put a little something in the chat about, it was a podcast that Malcolm Gladwell did about ways of determining leaders and this research into using lotteries as a way to determine student governments and how you get better government when you pick people randomly than when you do it through people choosing their own leaders. And in part, it's because the people who stand for elections often are of a certain type, and you don't get the diversity of opinions and range of skills when you only use the people who choose to put themselves forward. And when you cast lottery through the entire student population, you get a much more balanced and, and actually a more effective group. And it kind of theorizes what would happen if you did this on writ large, like.
That's
could
really
we actually
fascinating. Thank
could we
you.
get better leadership if we just randomly picked citizens of the United States than the people who we put in office? Certainly makes you think.
That's great. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jason. That's a great contribution.
Zan,
Yes.
how many people are coming to the Zoom tomorrow?